how have we got so confused about what the state is supposed to be about? You know, um, I had a very interesting conversation in the course of the week, and I don't think I'm going to name him because it might be embarrassing, with somebody who's been very prominent politically recently. And he was saying that he felt, when we talked about these kind of incidents, and we talked about two-tier justice, we talked about the Chinese spy case, and he said he thought that all these things had one central thing in common, which is that we've lost any clear sense of what it means to not only to be British, the kind of remarks of Robert Jenrick, and by the way, it was not Robert Jenrick, I need to clarify that. It could be easily thought that it was. But he said that he thought that what we needed to do was to redefine a test for everybody in public life, for anybody acquiring British citizenship, which would be a reworking in very precise terms of the old oath of allegiance, that you had to be clear that your central loyalty is to Britain. And I'd like to run that idea past you, but before you answer on it, I'd like you to think of the problem of doing it. And the problem of doing it, it seems to me, is once upon a time, your idea of allegiance to the crown, which is what we're talking about, was very clear. But now the crown itself has become very cloudy because, of course, Prince Charles, now King Charles, falls over himself to be nice to Islam and to go out of his way. He falls over himself, despite the fact that he's leader of the Church of England and the direct heir, one way or another, of Henry VIII, to cozy up to the Pope. All sorts of the old rules that the monarchy once embodied have gone. At the same time, of course, to substitute for that notion of the oath to king and country, back in the 1990s, back in the 2000s, Tony Blair and more particularly Gordon Brown came up instead with this weird notion of the British nation and the key British values of tolerance and diversity. Now, how on earth can you swear an oath of allegiance to tolerance and diversity? Because, of course, tolerance and diversity is a flag of convenience. You can say you're as British as the next person, but you can drive every coach and horses through it. Isn't this the problem? On the one hand, the idea of swearing an oath of allegiance is centrally good. I mean, you have, people like Gus O'Donnell, the former permanent secretary of the Treasury, saying that he thought his responsibility wasn't simply the welfare of Britain, but the world welfare. This absurd internationalism of our elites. But how can we have a sense of fundamental loyalty to the British state, the absence of which I think is the key to so many of the stories that are floating around now, when the official doctrine, when the official values of the British state is this weird kind of sieve through which it's a mesh through which anything can go, tolerance and diversity. What do we do? I mean, how would you agree? We need the idea, a revived idea of swearing to, as it were, loyalty to the nation. It's extraordinary to say this, but that then means we've got to have some sort of clear idea of what the nation is, isn't it? I mean, maybe dare one say it even in ethnic terms.
Well, yes, I think one of the difficulties there is, I mean, you mentioned this sort of Blairite hollowing out of our national identity that's already happened, and indeed that happening or being done by Charles in particular. It happened to some extent under Elizabeth as well, but he has really made himself the defender of faiths
Exactly.
and sort of invited people to comb through the royal archives to look at it in case there's any links with slavery, and it's another opportunity to sort of abase himself before woke. So to some extent, that already attenuates the significance of any oath to Charles or to the king, unfortunately. And my main concern there is that in the way, I mean, we do have citizenship ceremonies, of course, and tests you have to pass and things like this, and you can find videos online of people really going through them and sort of mocking the whole idea and thinking, oh well, I just have to do this to get my indefinite leave to remain or anything else or their benefits essentially. So I think this kind of thing would be unfortunately very open to abuse. And so to have this as the sort of only criteria one would need, I think would be probably a little too weak. I mean, you mentioned ethnicity there. I think that raises a lot of questions. But what one might talk about in terms of these. Let's think about the sectarian Muslim MPs, for instance, of which I think we could go more into, but it's been very notable, as I mentioned at the start, how little heed they pay to wider society. And
None at all. Effective. They only invoke Britishness when it's convenient. And it is clear that they use their position in Britain to try to leverage British policy in favour of Palestine or Pakistan or an obscure airport in the Midipuri region of Pakistan or whatever. That they have absolutely no allegiance whatever to the wider British state. The British state is simply seen as a piggy bank that can be raided for their own purposes. It's not true.
And of course, the electoral dynamics here are very insidious. This is sectarian voting, and this is not voting, as we've mentioned, on any particular issue like the bins or like tax rates. They're not really engaging in wider democracy. They're just voting for sectarian reasons.
But can we also be clear why it's so deadly? And all of these things fit together, including, of course, the rape gangs and whatever. What we're really saying is when we talk about these as Islamic or when we talk about them as Muslim, I think that doesn't really grasp quite why they're so dangerous. It's again the work that's being highlighted at the moment by one or two very brave journalists and some very brave academics. In other words, these societies are clan societies. They are held together by first cousin marriage, with all the dreadful consequences, of course, in terms of the incidence of genetic disorder and inherited disease and so on. But what they mean essentially is these are close-knit groups which are absolutely hostile to the individualistic values on which our society is founded. And what is moreover, the very fact that they're a group, they're a group dynamic, a group ethic. In other words, they have no notion of individual responsibility. There is no notion of an individual duty to the state. Everything is the family and the extended family, which is the clan. And the trouble is, groups like this exercise tremendous power within our fragmented individualistic state. Because, of course, you've got to ask why do we have so many Muslim politicians? The answer is because they command voting blocks. The clans act as voting blocks. The individuals, the junior members of the clan, particularly the women and the whatever, simply vote as they are directed. Our notion of individual responsibility. Again, look at that extraordinary incident between the police officers, the yet unresolved case between the police officers and the two Pakistani men who were defending their mother's honor. There is absolutely no notion of individual behavior. It is a collective enforcement of things that to us are foreign, like honor. Like the honor of the family, the honor particularly of the women of the family, which of course involves forms of, to our eyes, also of extreme repression. But Britain triumphed by getting rid of this, hence, frankly, the clans, the Highland clearances and whatever, the extraordinary attacks of the Tudor state on the border clans, the Reaver clans, which were exactly the same, the whole role of both the Catholic and the Anglican Church in the resistance of cousin marriage and so on, in the resistance to cousin marriage. All of this leading to the extraordinarily delicate balance of our state of individual values on the one hand and a collective sense of identity on the other. But that delicate balance is so easily torn apart. It simply becomes a solid voting bloc, which is guaranteed to return one of these MPs. But also, It is the fact that you then capture the entire machinery of government. You capture the police force. You capture social services. You capture the town hall. And again, none of these things have been sayable or describable. We are now confronting the consequences when we've let them happen. How on earth are we to undo them?
Well, they can be said a little in that people obviously do point to the problem of sectarianism, the problem of segregation in cities, and so on. And I think from that fact that these independent MPs are they silo themselves, but they are also shunned, and all of these attendant problems as you've laid out there, that's very much acknowledged. And we could really take a leaf out of Denmark's book here, where we would very much call this an ethnic ghetto, quite straightforwardly. Denmark likewise does that with parts of its cities that have become, had a sizable non-ethnically Danish population. But that's not merely just a sort of criticism. That's actually a legal term, and that introduces various duties on these areas to reduce the ghettoization,
I mean,
reduce
come on,
the extent
Laurie,
of.
stop using this abstract language. What the Danes are doing is moving people out. They are breaking up these areas of these mono blocks of Muslim clans. That's what they're doing. In other words, it's exactly the same as the Highland clearances or the attacks on the Reaver clans in the early modern period. You've actually got to break up the structure, which involves moving people. Can you see the British state doing that?
Well, certainly not at the moment, but I think with
But you know,
this.
you talked, and you will forgive my saying so, glibly of Denmark. Can you imagine a Starmer state which can't even control our frontiers, seriously considering how you deal with this? But again, we have to admit, don't we, that so long as we allow these concentrations to exist, these what we can now call, I think we should start calling them clan constituencies. When we have these clan constituencies, there is nothing we can, again be completely frank, there is nothing we can do about two-tier policing. There is nothing we can do to protect the rights of Jews in those areas. There is nothing we can do about the rape gangs. They will all continue. In other words, this is now entrenched and is irremovable without that a degree of political courage, which no one. I mean, you listen frankly to Nigel Farage. He steers as far clear from this as it's possible, does he not?
Well, let's steer towards it ourselves then, shall we, David? I mean, you're quite right that there's going to be no will for this kind of thing under Starmer, but I think we are heading towards that characterization of such places, as you say, of a clan constituency would be one way to put it. But if you can get that designation and get people to think about why this is a problem in and of itself, rather than, I mean, even Robert Jenrick, I mean, he was quite right to point out the what he called integration problems in Handsworth, but in many ways all he's doing there is sort of gesturing towards something in the most politically correct way he can.
Mm,
It's not really an
mm,
integration problem. There's never going to be any integration. I mean, the way he signed off this week was the time has come for muscular action to make integration a reality. Now, there is frankly, this is a what did he mean by that? One could tag a lot onto it, but that if you can, in a more broader and longer term project, find a way of defining legally what it means to be a clan constituency and say that this is actually not conducive to the good of the nation as a whole, and this is not what we were aiming for, let's say, when we started our experiment to rub the right's nose in diversity, or even before that, that this is unconducive to the public good, then doesn't solve things in itself, but there's at least a sense of, okay, well, this is the social problem and we know it's going to be there, and we're not going to tie it all up, try and make the bring the Israelis in and have the police, assemble in their hundreds to have a sort of Blairite, kumbaya ceremony to say, actually, no, everything's fine, diversity is our strength, and there's no problems here at all, because clearly there are.
I mean, just going back to the problem of Robert's approach, and I rate Robert and I like him a lot. When you talk about integration, you of course leave yourself open to the immediate what I call the left at the moment is very, very good at false equivalence. So if you get Isabella Oakeshott talking about people in Britain not actually speaking English, they all say, well, when you're in Dubai, do you speak Arabic? As though there was any possible comparison between the two situations. Well, when Robert uses the word integration, the immediate response has been, oh, come on, Mr. Jenrick, when you go to your favourite clubs in London, and I go to quite a few of them myself, do you encounter many Muslims? And the answer is, of course, not. But what we've got to do is to say that is simply false equivalence. We are not talking about integration. What we are talking about is people who are prepared to accept the broad social, political, and economic values of the majority. That's the key thing. In other words, we've got to do it. We've got to talk about these things in a way which makes absolutely clear that the responsibility is upon the immigrant and the immigrant groups. Again, there've been extraordinary scenes. I'm trying to remember the name of the particularly silly Guardian journalist who's gone out of my head, who said, isn't the responsibility of the white community to integrate foreigners just as important as foreigners to integrate into Britain? The answer is no, it is not. There is no comparison. And our structures of state cannot take clan groupings. They simply cannot. And the thing that's terrifying about them is, as I was saying before, the power which those clan groupings have to undercut the values, the functionings, the operations, the very safety of the majority.
It is interesting to me that there are, Starmer is a proceduralist. He's a lawyer. He wants to follow exactly what the independent institutions tell him to do all the time, except for certain moments. So we saw, for instance, the Home Office going against the ruling that they had to close the Epping Asylum Hotel. So he'll do it to to prop up the failing asylum system. He did it, of course, last year with the Southport unrest to launch this brutal crackdown, which was very, very politicized. And now he did it, in his words, because this was a fundamental issue of fairness. And so he's going to be trying to put a lot of pressure on the local police and various other government bodies to make this match go ahead. And so it seems that there is something to the man after all, and that is his credo. David, is fundamental issues of fairness, which is a suitably vacuous Starmerite phrase in my view.
Do you think he will push it to the point of forcing it through? Because if he forces it through and there is major disorder, there's then no doubt who is responsible, is there? And it will be extraordinarily difficult to blame the bogeyman of the far right. I mean, do you think he will? We know he's a political ass, but do you think he is so committed to these notions that he will take that risk, that people round him who have a little, more savvy than he does? I mean, you think of it. When is the match due?
6th of November.
Right. Oh, there's quite some time away, isn't there? But if you think of it, if he actually, against the wishes of what will be a very significant portion of the Labour Party, because the Labour Party is still desperate to try to stop the leakage of the Muslim vote to the independents. It will be against highly structured opposition from the Greens, from the Fruit and Nut Party, and all the rest of it. But above all, it will put all of those things that you're talking about absolutely on the line. You've been able to deal with Southport. You were able to deal with the riots in Southport. You've been able to deal with the Islamic hotels, with the myth. Oh, it's the far right. The implication, it's all Farage. This incident, this football match, actually goes to the very heart of the myth of multiculturalism. Surely, if you were advising him, if I were advising him, I know what I'd do. He's got to make the most tremendous noise about it, and then subtly back down in the face of serious advice from the police. And you will have assorted commissioners wheeled in to explain the terrible risk of violence, and we'll need a Church of England bishop to pop up. She or presumably they could find a transsexual that would. I think a transsexual in a mitre would be a wonderful sight to behold. We'll have to explain the risks to community cohesion, and at which point there will be a graceful backing off. I mean, shall we predict? Who's are you going to? Are you a betting man? What's the bet Starmer is actually going to force those Maccabees fans into that stadium? Do you think he's got the courage?
I think he actually might. I think he might be that, well, brave and foolish. I mean, he does, for instance, he knows how to corral the institutions of the state into doing something like
Mm,
this, as he did
true,
as
true.
DPP. So, and last year, of course. So, I think he might actually try and do it. So, it will be Keir's riot if that happens.